Well, just to start with, can you just, perhaps from your perspective, outline the history of the eradication effort from the start? Just the way
Well, I think probably I should start when I was the Commander of Police in the northern part of the state, of when I was asked by the then Commissioner of Police to investigate a complaint or information that a number of foxes had been brought into the state. And that information was about third-hand information that was provided at the time. And I was asked to put on it detectives that were experienced detectives to investigate that claim. And as the commander, of course, I had briefings with my officers, and I selected very experienced detectives at the time to take that role on. And it went from there. And the detective leading that investigation was Detective Inspector Michael Ottley, in fact, who was well known for his experience and professionalism in that area. He's now a retired police officer, but he is the person that led that investigation. And the findings of that were that there was little evidence, in fact no evidence, to support the claim that was being made at the time. And that's how the report was written up and provided to the Commissioner of Police. There was just nothing to support the suggestion that foxes had been brought into the state at that time, and it was really dismissed by police. Sure. And I wrote a report to that effect to the Commissioner of Police, giving it the information provided a very, very poor rating.
Sure. And that was the story regarding the two lots of cubs that were
reported? That's right. It was information. It was overheard information. I think it was, from memory, it was overheard in Glenorchy by a person who happened to hear somebody talking, said that they heard somebody talking about the importation of foxes into the state near some utility or something. Yeah.
Bear with me a second, I'm just going to move that. This investigation, there was no evidence. What happened after that?
Well, from there, as far as I was concerned, the matter was concluded, and then, of course, later on, my contract expired with the police service, and I then took on a position. I was elected to local government first of all, but then elected to Parliament in the upper house, and I then, of course, took on a renewed interest in the fox eradication program that was occurring. It wasn't referred to that at that time, but it was in relation to the state government and their position in regards to foxes in the state, and the establishment of a committee or of a organisation to investigate the position of foxes in the state and to carry out an eradication program. So I then developed an interest because of that, and I've then from that time followed it right through fairly closely, and I've had close contact with many people from all walks of life regarding the position of alleged or suggested position of foxes being in the state.
Around this time, around 2001, I think it was, there was quite a lot of sightings around that time.
Well, when you say sightings, they were alleged to be sightings. People thought in most.
Fairly credible.
Oh yes, there was. Yes.
Do you believe there are any foxes in Tasmania?
I've never ever said that there are no foxes in Tasmania. I don't know. But what I do say, and I've said it on numerous occasions, the evidence that is being used, the greater majority of the evidence being used is just not right, and it's flawed. And if you look at it closely, and I've brought it up in Parliament, and I have been challenged on that, I've been challenged on my statements, but there is a lot of evidence to support what I am saying. There is hardly one piece of evidence that's used that hasn't been changed in some way and or another. It's not straightforward at all. I take for example the Glenesk fox, if I can go there. Originally we are told, and there are public statements made, that a fox ran up across the road from the left-hand side of a vehicle. The vehicle ran over it, the fox was killed. The fox was warm. It was found in situ, the fox was warm. As that investigation went on, as the information came out, it was later found that in fact that wasn't the case. It's now said that the fox was killed somewhere else and brought and dumped at that site. And then veterinarians were called in, and that wasn't an easy task either. but an independent veterinarian, a doctor of veterinarian, came in, and he identified very clearly that fox had been killed at least, I think, 24 hours previously, 12 hours, 24 hours previously, and probably a lot longer. And I think that was also supported by other veterinarians at the time. So, we have all of that happening, and we have the one in Lillico, for instance, Lillico Strait, where it's now said, well, no, that fox wasn't killed there, it was probably killed elsewhere and brought in, and it was found by somebody riding a bike, and it wasn't reported for several months later. And that's the same with all of the evidence that's been produced. None of it is absolutely straightforward at all. I would have thought if people were finding foxes, they'd be very happy to put their name behind it and very happy to say, well, I've just found a fox, here it is, come and look at it. That doesn't work that way, unfortunately.
Why do you suppose that so much of the evidence is questionable? Why and is still being presented as credible?
Well, I'm really not going to really. I need to be very careful in this regard. What I have said, and what I said to the Minister for Police, there is so much money involved in this program. We're talking about millions and millions and millions of dollars, and millions of dollars are still being expended on this program. What I am saying is it needs to be done right. It needs to be seen as being very credible, and it needs to be done in such a way that the public can accept what's going on. Now, what I have said on many occasions is that the police, there ought to be, when a fox finding comes up, or what have you, there ought to be an absolute proper investigation of that to determine whether or not it's accurate, because that's the sort of evidence that the government, the federal government, are relying on to provide the funding. So you need to ensure that it is absolutely credible. Now, I'm not said, and I've never ever said, that the fox eradication program have set anything up. I've never said that. I'm not going to say that. But I'm not saying that others haven't done it. I haven't said that. I'm saying that others, in fact, there's evidence to suggest it very clearly that's happened. There's evidence to support that. And it should be followed through. It should be followed through. You find out that the evidence changes all the way through, but there's no investigation of it. And in my opinion, it's an offence. It's misleading. It is grossly misleading investigations. It's misleading the fox eradication program. It's misleading many people, and you can't tolerate that. If this was a police investigation, a criminal matter, the investigation would be continued through. It would be followed up thoroughly, and very clearly, where it's demonstrated that people have deliberately set out to mislead, have fabricated, have changed evidence, or what have you, then people would be charged.
Okay, that's a very good point, which I've been trying to get to the bottom of.
Yeah.
Why has no one been charged?
Because there's been no follow-up of investigations. There's been no thorough investigations into it. That's very clearly the situation and position. And why there's a reluctance to do it, I don't know. I had a meeting with the Minister at the time. It was Mr Llewellyn at the time, and this took place several years ago, putting forward my concerns in an almost identical way as I've just identified them here today. And I was accompanied by another person at the time. I had this meeting with the Minister when the Minister agreed that yes, there should be an investigation of the circumstances surrounding situations similar to the Glen fox find. It should be investigated, and it would be. It was indicated to me at the time that the Minister indicated there would be an investigation. That never occurred and hasn't occurred.
Yeah. And there's other clear-cut cases. I refer to the 98 fox that jumped off the bramble ship to Port Melbourne.
Yep.
There was supposedly video evidence of that,
yes,
although that's been disputed now.
That's right.
Okay. That is a clear case. I would have thought that would stack up in any court, in any investigation.
Yep.
Why has not that been followed through?
I just do not know why it hasn't been followed through, and I have my own view, and I've said this before too, that they probably fear the result. They probably fear the result of an investigation into some of these situations. That's the only answer I can give because of what's happening and so on. As I said, there needs to be good evidence to support the funding that's being provided by the state government and the federal government. I just have concerns about it. I have real concerns about it. If you go back, I think to the 1940s, and you can go back to the early 1900s, similar allegations and suggestions were being made in relation to foxes in this state. In fact, there's a situation in 1940 that parallels pretty well exactly what's happening now, of evidence being provided of foxes in the state and people seeing foxes and a body being found, I think, and things like that. In actual fact, I've prepared a speech on that, and I will provide it to the Parliament one day, and that is that I will relate this position. And as I said, it's almost identical to what's happening today. So it's gone on over years and years and years and years, decades and decades and decades, or a century. It's gone over for a century.
You referred to the investigation of the two lots that was used as evidence, even though there was no credible evidence found of that. Yeah, that it was just a story. There was also another investigation along Illawarra Road in Longford.
Yes.
And I believe you were involved in that. Was that under instructions of Stan Matisak, or did that come directly from David Llewellyn?
No, the investigation that we were involved in originally, I was responsible for, and that was the one I'm talking about. It's about 2001, yes. And I've related that. It went on to involve other information that was gained through that police investigation. And as a result of that, the detectives that I had a responsibility for at that time took up inquiries in Illawarra Road. They also took up and dug out a den at the time where a witness had said that there was a den on the property, that it was a fox den. In fact, that was excavated, and there was absolutely no evidence of fox involvement at all. But that investigation, police investigation, was a thorough investigation. It covered the state pretty well. My officers were involved in that for a long period of time. It wasn't done, and it wasn't a rushed investigation. And I then, when people started to criticise that investigation within the fox eradication program, people involved in it, I then started to think seriously about this matter. To attack a police investigation. And these were experienced police, very experienced police, very credible police, who had been supported in the criminal courts, all of the courts in this state. Their investigative ability never been challenged, in my opinion, to my knowledge. For people with no investigative ability at all to start and challenge that police inquiry, that police investigation, you start and then thinking, just what is going on, what's happening.
That investigation was never really made public. Why was that?
Wasn't made public.
The one in Illawarra Road, when I haven't actually found any documentation referring to it. Llewellyn and many members of Parks will say that they know foxes were brought in, and they won't give specifics, but it seems that they're referring to that incident rather than the one that the other is often talked about, which was the people discussing it.
This whole thing is clouded in what should I say, in people not wanting to come forward, people not wanting to open up, in gossip, in rumour. All of those sorts of things have gone haywire right through this whole program. And I think very clearly why there is a reluctance of some people to come forward, I'm not too sure. I just don't know why that's happened. But it's happened right throughout this whole program, right throughout its period of operation, and it's not getting any better. Not getting any better. And that is a real concern. So I could go on and I could look at the old beach incidents, for instance, which all of these incidents are relied on heavily, right, to identify the existence of foxes in the state. All that evidence is being used. Now, if you look at the position there with the chook pen where chooks were killed, number of chooks were killed, etc., only evidence that's been identified there were, as I understand it, 2 spots of blood. There were no fox prints, no photographs of foxes, no nothing. In actual fact, there was no forensic examination of the chooks done to my knowledge, and that's still a position I've been given, to determine whether there was saliva, fox saliva, or anything to do with foxes on any of these.
Dog saliva.
That's right. That's right. That is absolutely right. And in fact, a camera was in situ near that site for 12 to 18 months. It was obviously misplaced and wasn't recovered by whomever set it up, and I can only assume it was the fox eradication program that set it up, but it was recovered by another individual. That camera had been in place for a long time, and there were certainly no photographs of foxes on that camera. Certainly just about every other animal that we have in Tasmania, but certainly no foxes. That was in place for a long time. That was in the area where it is alleged that this fox was, or foxes were. You know, you just got to start and wonder what's going on. You know, very clearly there's a huge amount of suspicion about that. There's no doubt about it at all. Absolutely. You know, if that was a police investigation investigating that, I know very clearly what the result would be. Very clearly what it would be.
Putting aside the questionable evidence, do you accept the position that there's a possibility of a low-density population of foxes in Tasmania, the characteristics of which are very misunderstood? There's very little documentation about on a large area such as Tasmania, how difficult they would be to find, etc., and what their behaviour would be, whether it would differ from high density population, which is really the only sort of studies that have been done.
I'm no absolute expert on foxes. However, I've been given a lot of information in the last 7, 8 years in relation to foxes, and I know quite a bit about how they behave and what they do. And I've taken a lot of that information from a gentleman, a very, very professional person involved in fact was originally involved in the program, Mr. Clive Marks, and you've probably heard of him being before today. You know, he has given me a good background on how foxes behave, how to expect them to behave in the wild, and etc. So, you know, and what they live on, their life, how long they will live for, and all of these things. So I have a fair knowledge of that. Now, my position there is that I don't have any faith, and that's come through very clearly in the evidence that's being produced at all. And what I keep saying is, while I don't know whether a fox is here or not, the evidence in my view is not credible. And I've also sort of have a belief that if foxes were here, why aren't they being why can't they be photographed? For instance, they put cameras up all over the place. Why aren't they being shot? You've got thousands and thousands of professional shooters in this state who earn a living from shooting wildlife in the right circumstances and with the permits and all of those things that are required and necessary. They do it professionally. You talk to those people and they will tell you, and I haven't spoken to any yet that have seen a fox or shot at a fox or seen any that would indicate that there are foxes present in any area. I haven't spoken to any. Now, I just find that an interesting issue. If you look at the other evidence and the other side of things, what we've been told is that they're here in very low densities. However, we seem to get them run over on a fairly regular type basis. The one at Burnie, the one in Lillico Strait, the one at Glen Esk. You know, there's three that I recall very clearly, and of course we had the Bosworth fox shot back in when was that 2003 thereabouts, early in the piece anyway. I think it might have been before then, but anyway. So we have that, and they're telling us foxes are in very low density now. I just have some issues and concern. What I have said all along. I'm not saying that we shouldn't be looking out for foxes in the state. Of course we should, because if they were here, they would be devastating. There's no doubt about that. But we have a known problem with feral cats. It is a known problem. We have got thousands, probably hundreds of thousands of feral cats out there, and we know that they're causing immense harm and immense destruction of wildlife. We know that you've got, I think, 50 odd feral cats will eat over a tonne of wildlife annually. Right? We know that's happening. I know of 50 feral cats that were trapped and killed on the northeast coast recently. We know that they're a problem. Why aren't we also concentrating on that at the same time? And I think that sort of thing would give this program a lot of credibility, and I think it would provide it with a lot more support from the public as well. And I think that there would be very few people that wouldn't be on side with it. I certainly would, and I think many others would be as well. It's a problem we've got. We know that. Let's fix that.
Talk about public support. It's obviously very important to the effort. How do you rate public support of the program?
Well, that is one way, is to raise the public support of the program, to bring into it as another part of it the position involving the feral cats. Now, farmers have come out, and there was a lot of press release on the devastation that feral cats were causing going back about 2 years ago, where farmers had shot a number of feral cats, had hung them on the side of a fence, just identifying and demonstrating the numbers that we have out there and the problems that they were creating, and the diseases that they were carrying as well. Now, I think that sort of thing, the public would accept that, and the public would say, well, go for it. We know it's a problem, it needs to be fixed. And sure, at the same time, there can be a fox lookout and the things that you need to do in relation to ensuring foxes aren't in this state should be occurring at the same time.
Sure. Just getting back to your role in police investigations of the foxes, what would you consider, and what would you suspect would be the motives for anyone bringing foxes into Tasmania?
Well, very clearly, I would say that foxes may well have been brought into the state to keep the program moving forward. And I'm not saying that the fox eradication program have done that at all. I'm not saying that at all. Because there is information, I think Clive Marks will give you this, of a gentleman who spoke to him saying that he did bring in scats into this state, that he did plant scats in this state because he feared that the program might fall apart, that it might not be continued. And he believed very clearly that there were foxes in this state. And so he wanted the program to be given some further support for it to continue. So that's one motivation for it, and I can understand that.
You don't have to say on camera, but do you know the name of that person?
Well, I don't know whether you're going to talk to Clive Marks, but Clive Marks will you have? Yes. He will simply give you a Christian name. Okay. I don't think there's any difficulty with that. He'll give you a Christian name. But we pretty well know who it is, but I can't do that on the camera, of course I can't. But Clive Marks will give you that Christian name of that person, who, when you read what Clive Marks has provided me on this, and he will tell you the same, I think, sounded very, very credible, the way this person went about it in talking to Mr. Marks about it, and his reasons for doing so. So, that's one reason. But if you go back in history, and if you go back to the 1940s, what was being said then was that foxes were being brought into the state for the purposes of fox hunts, for the gentry, for those people who wanted to have some activity and wanted to be involved in fox hunts and chases. And that was the reason the foxes being brought in back then. I'd be surprised if that was the situation now.
Yeah. There's been a lot of criticism of David Llewellyn's role early on in the program. Is there anything in particular you could comment on that?
The only thing is there that I was frustrated, and he, as the minister at the time, would confirm this. I was frustrated, and I'd spoken with the minister on occasions in relation to this matter, and I brought up with him the situation I've just discussed in relation to feral cats. Why couldn't they be involved in this program? Why couldn't they become a part of it? Why isn't there an investigation of these allegations that are brought forward? Why isn't there an investigation of the carcasses that have been found from time to time? And all of that, and to be told on one occasion that yes, that would occur, then for it not to occur very clearly.
You said that Llewellyn had told you that these investigations would occur. When did he give you that assurance?
That, in actual fact, the now President of the Legislative Council accompanied me at the time. That would have been whilst he was still minister, so it would have had to have been.
I'm sorry, the mic's just slipped down.
Oh, sorry, stuffed
Right.
it. Stuffed it up again.
That's okay. Yep, that's good. Okay, sorry, can we just go that again?
So,
When did Llewellyn give you the assurance that the police investigation would...
I'm guessing it would have been 3 years ago now, I would think. 3-4 years ago. I
And
think 3 years.
nothing came from it?
Pardon?
And nothing came from it?
No, nothing came from it at all.
Were you given any explanation?
No.
Where was I? You've been very vocal in your concerns about the program, and there have been a lot of reports over the years and reviews. With regards to the Public Accounts Committee review, you're
Yes.
a part of that.
Yes.
Were you satisfied with the results?
I've got to be careful what I say here. I was a part of the committee, but I think it's fairly common knowledge that I wasn't. And I've taken advice on that since then. I've taken advice. But I think I just need to be a little bit careful there in relation to that at this time.
Okay, I mean, obviously what I'm getting at is you signed off on it.
Well, my signature's not on the document.
Right. Okay. I'll have to look into that further.
Yes.
But, yeah. Now, the PAC report also brought up the end game, like when success could be qualified, like when they can actually say we've eradicated foxes and divert funds.
Simon, you tell me, when can they say that they're successful? At what stage can they say that they're successful? This could go on for the next 10, 20, 30, 40 years on the view that there probably are a few foxes in Tasmania. So when will they know that the program's been successful? All the baiting that has occurred in this state, and there's a huge amount of baiting that occurred, I find it difficult to accept that there hasn't been one carcass found, one body found, probably close to it or in a log or what have you. I find that hard to believe. That the extensive program that's underway now as to why there isn't a carcass found somewhere. And the other question I keep referring to or raising is that in those areas where the baiting has occurred, are the sightings still continuing in those or alleged sightings still continuing in those areas? And I've been told yes, they are. So I just have some concerns about the effectiveness of a baiting program in all of the circumstances. I'm not convinced that that's really working, and I've been outspoken about the fact too that if we're at all serious about this, why hasn't there been legislation put through to allow the fox eradication program to walk onto any property that they want if there is a suspicion or suggestion that there could be a fox or foxes on that property? It stands to reason, in my view, that should be the case, and I would support that legislation. And I've said this. I've said it to the minister. I said it to the minister at the time on many occasions. I would support that legislation. That came out in a Parliamentary Accounts Committee investigation or inquiry as well. That should happen. That should happen. That should be. They should be able to do that. It would be a nonsense that a fox could be seen running around on a big farming property, and they have no authority.
My understanding was that they do actually have authority if they're absolutely certain that they can't. They have to notify the owner first, but they still have the authority to. I mean, they can't just go on and bait, but if they have a credible sighting or a credible evidence, they can go on there as long as they've informed the owner that they're doing it.
Well, Simon, that evidence hasn't come out, and the evidence that's come out has been supported, and I think if you read through the Parliamentary Accounts Committee report, is that they don't have that authority. They don't have it. But now I stand to be corrected. Now that's the information that we've been provided with, is that they don't actually have the right to say to a farmer, "I'm sorry, we're coming on your property, like it or not, and we're going to carry out the investigations, inspections, a thorough search of the property in the way we want to. As I understand, it's not the case, but stand to be corrected.
Sure. And there has been a lot of criticism about the scat detection methods and, well, and the results and the evidence. Would you like to comment on that?
Yep. It's interesting, isn't it? As a member of a farmer said to me the other day, and a fairly big farmer in the state said to me the other day, it's interesting, isn't it, that if you look at Tasmania, the size of Tasmania, but that it's fairly easy to find a scat. You know, and there are interesting things about the scats, is that to my knowledge, currently there's only been one scat found that's been related to a fox. One fox hasn't, they haven't found 3 scats, 4 scats, 5 scats that have been dropped by the same fox. Also, there is no endemic species that have been found in any of those scats. Now, the paddymellon, for instance, is a very common animal in the state. They are not a fast animal. They are an easily caught animal. They are an animal that's road-killed probably more prolifically than any other native animal, wild animal, feral animal, I would suggest. But no, not one scat has been found to contain the paddymellon, for instance. Which...
There's been no endemic mainland species found in them either.
No, well, that might be so as well. That might be so as well. I don't know. I haven't looked at that. But what I'm saying here is that I would have thought that would have been the case. That there would have been hair, or there would have been something to identify with that. You then have the evidence that I referred to of the gentleman who spoke to Mr. Marks, claiming that he had brought scats in, and he had planted scats for the purpose of ensuring that this program continued because of his concern. Real concern that there were foxes in this state. So, you know, you start and look at that. Then you have, of course, the one scat being found on Bruny Island. You know, so if all of this is right, we've got foxes really all around Tasmania. And the north, the central, the east coast, right down south. We've now got them on Bruny Island. Why aren't they breeding? Why aren't they breeding? You know, I would have thought that if they've been here for so long, they've got to be breeding, unless somebody's continually bringing them in, because they only have a relatively short lifespan in the wild. And I think Mr. Mark says that their lifespan in the wild is about 4 years. Is about 4 years. Well, that's a relatively short lifespan. So very clearly, they're not breeding, then people were bringing them in. And how are they doing that? And why are they able to do that?
There's been a lot of criticism, especially early on. I'm sure it's been tightened up with quarantine measures on Burnie Port. There was, of course, that 198 fox, and there have been other rumours of other ones. Can you comment at all about the measures that were taken to tighten up the ports? And I understand there was a fair bit of dissent among the workers at the time, because some of them felt that they had been vilified, and some felt that, there was quite a kerfuffle at the time. Can you comment at all on that? Yeah, look, they had to tighten things up. There is no doubt about that. I just still wonder whether or not it's tight enough. And I don't know exactly in the fine detail as to where they've gone with it and as to how they've closed it off. I understand that there is a closer inspection made of vehicles coming into the state, of opportunities in that regard. As I understand that there's closer examination and inspection made of those vehicles, people coming off the ferry, or the ferries. But whether or not it is tight enough, there are very many other ways of which they could be brought in. They could be brought fishing vessels, of course. They could be brought in by that means. I would have thought would have been fairly easy as well. So whether or not all of those opportunities have been closed off, I don't know. And I'm not quite sure of what's happened at the dock in Melbourne as to whether or not they have that now covered. But I just find it interesting that you could have foxes sneaking around, wanting to go onto boats and so on, onto ships. You hear, and Clive Marks makes comment on that. He finds that a very interesting position that should be the case, and that in fact they're all hopping on boats and coming to Tasmania. They're not hopping on boats and going anywhere else, but they are suggesting coming to Tasmania. Now,
I just find that an interesting situation as well. I can't say it's not right, because I can't. But I just find it interesting, to say the least.
Yep. After the 98 Fox and Bernie Port, there were a number of layoffs among quarantine staff, and it has been suggested that a number of hoaxes, which have been pretty much substantiated as being hoaxes around that time, were as some sort of revenge or payback due to those layoffs. In your time of investigation, do you see anything that would substantiate that was occurring?
The information was being provided to me clearly that was happening. There was nothing provided to me where I could have gone out and I've raised it previously, but there was nothing where I could go out and demonstrate that it needed to be investigated. There needs to be a thorough investigation of that situation just to see whether or not it was right. I just didn't have enough information or evidence to go that distance, and I'm not one. With my background, having been a detective for something like 17, 18 odd years, I'm not one to go off asking for investigations and inquiries when there is not good evidence to support a reason for that to occur, because it is resource intense and also it costs a lot of money as well. So I wouldn't do that, and as I said, my investigative background has clearly identifies that position to me.
Yeah. It's been mentioned on a number of occasions the reason why there hasn't been any prosecutions is due to a statute of limitations.
Yep.
Well, a law school dropout, I can't remember ever getting to that. Could you explain that?
Yeah. So I mean that's been identified to me as well. But I don't know whether or not that's been a reasonable position or not. And once again, you'd need to look at each situation, each occasion to see whether or not that has been a reason, or in fact whether or not there was any investigation done to get the evidence to take a prosecution. For instance, as I understand it, it's been suggested, I think by the current minister, that the police have the ability to carry out an investigation at any time they want in relation to Fox hoaxing, etc. Well, in my opinion, that's not absolutely right. Why would the police want to become involved in that sort of an investigation unless a complaint or an allegation was made to them, or the government or the Fox eradication program went to the police and said to the police, look, we would like you to investigate this matter? Then the police would be duty bound, in my view, to take the matter on if they believed there was evidence there to require an investigation. But to think, and to suggest that the police, of its own accord, would just come up and say, look, we'll have a look at that, I think is just not reasonable.
Where does the figure of 6 months come from, the statute of limitation? And can you explain what that means?
It's under it's in the summary offences legislation. And it would be included in the legislation dealing with the animal importation, and I haven't read it of late. I did read it previously when I was involved in investigation in 2001, but there's clearly a limitation of time in which you have to put a complaint or to get a complaint before a court from the time of the offence was committed until that complaint gets into court. And if you're outside that period, then the statute of limitations precludes you from being able to do that. So that's it's a legislated position.
Sure.
Now, whether that's still 6 months, because some were changed, and I think with traffic matters, for instance, it was increased to 12 months, I think, or 2 years, statute of limitation, and with crime, as we know, there's no statute of limitation, I think, with crime, that it can be at any time.
Sure. What I'm trying to get at with this whole project is I feel it's in the public interest to have the truth on all the matters. Do you think it's really in the public interest, no matter what is uncovered, to get to the truth of what has happened over the last 10 years with the Fox eradication program? Is there a sort of a limit where it could be so damaging that it's not worth investigating and to drag up things?
It's an interesting question that you ask. I have called for a long time. I called for it with the Minister Llewellyn at the time, that there should have been a full and absolute investigation of all of the circumstances, once and for all, to satisfy the public as to really what's going on. And to see whether or not there is sufficient evidence available, real evidence available, for the matter to proceed in the way that it's proceeding. I've said that. I've said that to the minister, that should occur, but that hasn't eventuated. And I just do have some concerns. Of course I do, as do a number of members of the public. I've never for 1 minute said the fox eradication program haven't been a hard-working and assiduous lot of people. I've never said that. And there's no doubt they are doing a lot of work. There's no doubt about that at all. That can be seen as to what they are doing. But I've said all along, and I still stand by that at this stage, a lot of the evidence that's being used to support that is extremely questionable.
I think I'm pretty much covered. One thing that I'm trying to clear up is that investigation that took place along Illawarra Road.
Yep.
There were reports that there were pens which had been housing foxes. Apparently they had been damaged by a fallen tree, and the story was that foxes had escaped. At the time, members of Parks and Wildlife were extremely concerned about this, to put it lightly, and to this day they still believe that actually occurred. Did you see any evidence, circumstantial, anything that you can comment upon? Because I mean, you were there at the time at that property. Apparently they were bulldozed eventually, the pens. Were they bulldozed by the time you got there?
There was no evidence in the police investigation at the time to confirm or support that. But having said that, I have been given information recently in relation to this situation, and I'm now determining whether or not what I need to do with it. Yes, and it's been suggested to me that there was a cover-up of that. Yes, that as a result of that, foxes did escape into the wild. That's been the suggestion. It's even been identified to me the location, or very close to where the location is, and some names have also been provided to me as well.
You investigated that case, though?
Well, my officers were involved in an investigation, and that was being supported at the time. That was being put forward at the time, but there was no, and I'd need to read the file again now. But to my knowledge, there was no evidence to support that at that time, and I'm now just beginning to wonder whether or not that was known or put to the police at the time. And it may not have been. It may not have been. Now, I've got to work out when this was. I've now got that knowledge, and I've had that knowledge for a while. So I've now got to thinking whether or not the police did have that information or that evidence at the time, and I'm not too sure. And I said I'd need to read through the report just to establish whether or not that was the case. But certainly I now have that information. I have it in my position as a parliamentarian. And I've got to make a determination on where I go with it. As I said, I've been given the names of some people as well.
Surely, if you look at the evidence which is used by the program, that fits in very closely with the timeline of a
Yes.
lot of sightings
Yes, it does.
and evidence around
Yes.
that particular area at the time.
Yes, it does.
So,
Yeah, and it's in the
it's all
location.
circumstantial, but
Yeah, and it's in the location of where some, I think, very good sightings were identified and so on. So you're right. You're absolutely right there. So, as I said, I now have it. I'll make a determination on that as soon as I'm able to.
would you think it in the public interest to know the facts of that?
Oh, absolutely. You know, where public monies are being expended, and the amounts that are being expended, they are entitled to know, in my view, just what's going on. And I think that for people to say, well, you know, these are things that the public are best kept from the public, I don't agree with that at all. Public money is being expended in the big way they are entitled to know what's going on. They're entitled to know what the evidence is, and they're entitled to know and be satisfied and have confidence in what's happening. And that's very important, to have confidence in what's happening when their monies are being expended in the way that they are.
Do you accept that the reason those investigations and that has never come to light has been political?
I'm not going to make a statement in relation to that at this time, other than to simply say that if the information I've got is right, then certainly there would need to be a good examination and investigation of it.
Right. Well, I think we've pretty much covered. Is there anything else that you wanted to talk about on the record regarding the program?
Simon, other than the fact, and I asked questions in the Parliament yesterday in relation to the position regarding the bringing into this state foxcats, bringing into this state green pelts, in other words fresh pelts from foxes. And it's been identified to me in Parliament on Tuesday that there are no permits or authorities required to bring that sort of thing into this state for the fox eradication program. However, if you go to the PIPWE site, the own department site, and look at their quarantine rules and laws, it very clearly says there that you are not able to bring into this state without proper authority, signed authority, pelts, untanned that is, green pelts, fresh pelts, etc., including scats and other things. That's on this document, quarantine document, that is on the website of the department. So I just wonder why that is the case, and I'm sort of wondering what's happening. Is there a rule for one and a rule for others? I would find that very difficult to accept and understand if that's the case. So I've asked another question yesterday, and I'll be interested in the answers I get in relation to that.
Yeah, I mean, it's obvious. Well, it seems rather clear that the rules have changed at some point, and it has been in order to protect. Would you accept though that if the program's reasons for bringing those scats in for training purposes were legitimate in context of what they're doing, that this could be just a distraction?
Well, no, I don't, because it needs to be done right. If people are doing something and if the law says this is the way it's got to be done, then that's the way it should be done, and nobody should be exempt from that. I don't care who you are. You have no right to be exempted from the processes of the legislation and the law, and you can't have one rule for one lot and another rule for others. It very clearly should say there that a department in investigations, whatever they're doing, are able to bring in certain things, but public are excluded from that. It needs to be clear. People need to understand it. The people are confused now as to what's going on. The department have said you don't need any permits to bring scats in, etc., etc., authorisations as such. So it needs to be clear. People need to understand where it is. I don't see that as a distraction at all. Some people have said to me that what I'm doing is a distraction. I don't believe it's a distraction. We're talking about a huge amount of money here being expended, and why shouldn't they be challenged? If everything's right, it makes you better. I've got no problem with people challenging me with anything I do. I never have done as a police officer. I appreciate a challenge at times because it makes you ensure that what you're doing is right. Or is the best that you can do in all of the circumstances. They shouldn't be worried about that. They shouldn't be concerned about that.
Exactly what Clive Marks has been saying. It should be completely open. They should welcome it.
Of course they should do. They should welcome it. But every time you raise the subject, I'm either howled down, or you're going to be present in Parliament when I ask questions from time to time, where I'm howled down for having the audacity to challenge what's going on. Well, I just don't think that those people are really viewing this and seeing this in the right light. I really don't. If you're doing it right, you shouldn't fear that. There's no reason to fear that, for goodness sake. It's very easy to get through it and get over it and move on. The people need to be confident, and I've had many people, and I could name people if they gave me the right to name them in this state, of big farmers, people involved on the land and agriculture, and indeed my family were involved in agriculture and on the land as well, and they raise issues and concerns. There are others out there who accept it all and believe, and that's fair enough. It's okay. There's no problem with that either. But we just need to get it right moving forward.
Yep. Just one more thing that just came to mind. there was a lot of criticism when the original Fox Free Task Force, it was called back then.
Yep, Fox Free Task Force then, yeah.
Yeah,
Yep.
was put together, that it was the people who were chosen were not chosen on merit as such, and they weren't chosen for their scientific background, and that the early 2 or 3 years caused a great deal of damage to the program, because that was when it was most important, apparently, because that's when these foxes could have been breeding, and that's when it really had to be dealt with. And do you think that those decisions and the way that they behaved at the time was particularly damaging to public confidence?
That's been a suggestion and the allegation made to me. I have never gone into the close credentials of any of those people, and I say that very clearly, to establish and identify whether or not I believe they had the right credentials and capacity to be involved in the program. So it is difficult for me to make statement on that. Allegations have been made, but I haven't done that. But what I have said, and I've said this on a fairly frequent basis too, that people in that program should be picked for their expertise and the professionalism that they could bring into the organisation, and that I believe that there is a strong position for people with a very strong and good what should I say, proven background in investigative ability to be involved in the program. And I think had that have been the case, I'm very confident that a lot of these things would have been sorted out and fixed very early in the piece, had they've had that background and that experience.
All right, I think we're done. Yes.
Thanks, Simon.
Thanks very much for your time.
I'll get moving.